You need to understand the market realities here. That's what Levi Coleman said while adjusting his tie and sliding the compensation letter across his mahogany desk. One number on that page confirmed every suspicion I'd quietly harbored for the past 18 months. Senior Data Architect, 13 years of experience, compensation adjusted to reflect current market standards and internal parity structures. Internal parity apparently meant I was earning 42% less than the consultant they'd hired last month to audit my work. The same consultant who'd spent his first week asking me to explain what a data pipeline was. Same job function, half my tenure, but he had connections to the board and a degree from Wharton. Take the weekend to think it over, Levi continued, his fingers drumming against the desk like this was just another routine conversation. Like he wasn't delivering an insult wrapped in corporate language. We believe this reflects your value to the organization appropriately. I didn't take the weekend. I didn't even take an hour. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope I'd prepared 3 days earlier, when a colleague had accidentally forwarded me the wrong spreadsheet. The one showing everyone's actual compensation. I signed the letter with a ballpoint pen that had the company logo on it, then slid it back across his desk with a steady hand. Effective immediately, I said. 2:30 p.m. today. By 2:33 p.m., my building access badge had been deactivated. By 2:41 p.m., my company laptop was wiped remotely. By 3:15 p.m., the CFO was leaving me voicemails with the kind of urgency usually reserved for server fires. By 4 p.m., 7 executives were gathered in an emergency meeting staring at dashboards that had started flashing red the moment my access disappeared, with projected losses already climbing past $32 million. But let me start from the beginning and explain how I became the most expensive resignation in company history by simply choosing to value myself the way they refused to. Before I go further, if you appreciate stories where people who actually build the systems teach expensive lessons to those who take them for granted, hit that subscribe button. More stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the part where a single letter of resignation costs an entire leadership team their quarterly bonuses. My name is Sophia Hayes. I'm 43 years old, and I've spent the last 2 decades building data infrastructures that companies depend on but rarely understand. I didn't graduate from an Ivy League school. My degree came from a solid state university where professors cared more about teaching than publishing papers for tenure. Before that, I worked my way through community college while managing a restaurant at night, learning how to function on 4 hours of sleep and making decisions under pressure. Those years taught me something important. When systems break, nobody cares about your credentials. They care about whether you can fix the problem before it gets worse. That principle followed me into every job I took afterward. I landed at Strive Innovations 12 years ago, back when the company was still figuring out what it wanted to be. They called themselves a technology solutions provider, which was code for, we help businesses make sense of their data. Our clients ranged from healthcare systems to financial institutions, all of them dependent on our platform to process, analyze, and secure massive amounts of sensitive information. When I joined, they had maybe 200 employees and systems held together with duct tape and prayer. Their data architecture was a nightmare, built by contractors who'd long since moved on. Nobody had documentation. Nobody understood how the different pieces connected. They had databases that talked to each other through processes someone had coded during an all-night session and never bothered to explain. I made myself indispensable by understanding what everyone else found too boring or complicated to learn. I volunteered for the migrations nobody wanted. Took on the legacy systems that made senior developers groan. Learned every dependency, every edge case, every weird quirk that could bring the whole operation down at the worst possible moment. People started saying, "Ask Sophia, she'll know." First it was casual. Eventually it became official policy. I still remember my first major crisis. A database corruption incident that hit on a Friday night right before a long weekend. We had client data at risk, compliance violations piling up by the minute, and executives panicking because they couldn't quantify the damage yet. I'd been with the company less than 8 months. I traced the problem to a backup script that someone had modified without testing it properly. Restored the data, identified the corruption patterns, and rebuilt the affected records before Monday morning. The CEO at the time, a guy named Robert Finch who'd started the company in his garage, sent me a brief email. "You saved us. Thank you." That was the job. Fix things before anyone realized how close we came to disaster. Keep the infrastructure stable so the business could run smoothly. Do the unglamorous work that made everyone else's jobs possible. Over the years, my role evolved. I went from data engineer to senior engineer to lead architect to principal architect, though HR always managed to keep my title just below the threshold that would require a significant pay adjustment. I built the data governance frameworks, designed the security protocols, created the disaster recovery procedures that got us through audits and compliance reviews. I learned failure modes not from textbooks but from actual incidents. The time a vendor changed their API without warning. The time someone from marketing ran an unauthorized query that locked up the production database. The time a junior developer deployed code on a Friday afternoon that corrupted 3 months of financial records. I documented everything not because I planned to need it someday but because that's how my brain works. Root cause analyses, incident timelines, pattern recognition. What broke, why it broke, what warnings were ignored before it broke. Then Strive decided to scale aggressively. The board brought in new leadership with fancy pedigrees and bigger ambitions. Our new CEO, Wyatt Cooper, came from a Fortune 500 background and loved talking about transformative growth and market disruption. He brought in a new CFO, a new chief people officer, and a new philosophy. We needed to elevate our talent brand. Elevating the talent brand meant 2 things. Hiring people with impressive resumes and restructuring compensation to reflect market positioning rather than actual contribution. Engineering wasn't exempt from this shift. Suddenly, we had strategy consultants with MBAs making architectural decisions they didn't understand. We had transformation leads who'd never written a line of production code. They loved creating frameworks and alignment matrices but couldn't explain how our systems actually worked. Meanwhile, I was still the person getting called at 1:47 a.m. when some obscure integration started throwing errors nobody could diagnose. The first real warning sign came when they launched something called the Strategic Leadership Development Program. It targeted high-potential early career talent, which translated to recent graduates from prestigious schools. They got rotational assignments, executive mentorship, and starting salaries that made veteran engineers compare notes in disbelief. One of them was a guy named Henry Wallace, 26 years old. Wharton MBA with an undergraduate degree in economics. Sharp in the way people who ace standardized tests are sharp, but lacking any practical experience with the systems he was supposed to help optimize. He'd done a stint at a management consulting firm and had the slide decks to prove it. They gave him the title of business strategy analyst. Within 6 months, they promoted him to strategy manager. Within a year, director of data strategy and transformation. He reported directly to the CFO and had authority to influence technical roadmaps, despite not understanding what a data pipeline did. One afternoon, Henry circulated an internal analysis comparing compensation levels for traditional technical roles versus strategic technical leadership positions. The data was supposedly anonymized, but when your sample size is small enough, anonymity doesn't mean much. That's when I saw it in writing. My total compensation after 13 years was barely above what the new leadership program hires were getting on day 1. Henry specifically, the person who constantly asked me to explain basic concepts, was making 42% more than me. I didn't confront anyone immediately. Instead, I did something more deliberate. I started preparing. The real moment of clarity came 3 months later in Levi Coleman's office. Levi was our VP of People Operations, a title that sounded more impressive than HR director but meant essentially the same thing. He always seemed exhausted, like he was perpetually putting out fires he didn't start. Sophia, he began, pulling up a document on his monitor. We've completed our annual compensation calibration. I wanted to discuss your adjustment personally. He turned the screen toward me. The number was insulting. A 2.3% increase. Barely enough to cover inflation, let alone acknowledge 13 years of keeping their infrastructure from collapsing. This reflects our internal parity frameworks, Levi said, using that corporate passive voice that absolved everyone of responsibility. We've had to standardize compensation across similar role functions. Similar to whom? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The new strategic leadership positions require certain credentials that command different market rates. You need to understand the market realities here. Market realities, I repeated slowly. So, Henry Wallace, who asks me daily to explain things he should already know, Makes 42% more than me because he has an MBA? Levi's expression tightened. I can't discuss other employees' compensation. You don't have to. I've seen the numbers. I didn't mention how the accidentally forwarded spreadsheet that someone in finance had sent to the wrong distribution list. Let me make sure I understand. 13 years of building and maintaining systems that generate millions in revenue means less than 2 years and a Wharton degree. Sophia, it's not that simple. It seems very simple, I interrupted. You're telling me that credentials matter more than competence. That someone who can make a compelling slide deck is worth more than someone who can actually keep your systems running. Levi shifted in his chair. We value your contributions, but we have to maintain competitive positioning for talent acquisition. By undervaluing the talent you already have? Take the weekend to think it over, he said, his tone shifting to something that was probably meant to sound conciliatory. We believe this reflects your value to the organization appropriately. If you have concerns, we can revisit during the next cycle. The next cycle. Always the next cycle. The same promise I'd heard before, the one that never materialized into anything meaningful. I'd prepared for this moment. Not because I wanted it to happen, but because I'd seen the pattern clearly enough to know it was inevitable. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared after seeing that spreadsheet. The resignation letter was already signed, already dated. I just had to fill in the time. 2:30 p.m. I wrote, then slid it across the desk. Levi stared at it like I'd placed a live snake in front of him. You don't need to make this decision right now. I'm not making it right now. I made it 3 days ago when I saw exactly how little this company values me. This conversation just confirmed I was right. Sophia, let's talk about this. We can escalate your concerns. Maybe there's room for adjustment. There isn't. I stood up, collecting my bag. You just told me that my 13 years here, all the crises I've resolved, all the systems I've built, are worth 2.3%. I believe you. That's the clearest communication this company has given me in years. At least give us 2 weeks. Document your projects. Help with transition. I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. My documentation is complete. My systems are described in detail. Every procedure is written down. You just need someone who can understand it. Good luck finding them. At 2:30 p.m. I walked out of Levi's office. At 2:33 p.m., my badge stopped working when I tried to scan back into the secure development area. At 2:41 p.m., my laptop went black as IT remotely wiped it. At 2:45 p.m. my company phone was disabled. I packed the personal items from my desk. A photo of my daughter's college graduation. A coffee mug that said, I turn coffee into data pipelines. The leather notebook I'd kept for years, filled with incident logs, system quirks, and procedural knowledge that never made it into official documentation because official documentation was for ideal scenarios, not messy reality. I walked through the open plan workspace where my team sat. Most of them suddenly found their monitors fascinating. A few met my eyes with expressions that ranged from shock to understanding. One of them, a senior engineer named Ahmed Patel, gave me a subtle nod that said everything he couldn't say out loud. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, dropped my badge and building key in the return box by the security desk, and walked to my car. At 2:54 p.m. I sat in my car and pulled out my personal phone. There was already an email waiting from the company I'd been talking to for the past month. The one that had responded to my exploratory message with, "We've been hoping you'd consider us." The one that had made me an offer 3 weeks ago that I'd accepted contingent on, "When can you start?" I replied, "Tomorrow morning." At 3:07 p.m., the first alert hit Strive's monitoring systems. I didn't see it directly, but I knew exactly what it looked like because I'd designed those monitoring dashboards. Elevated error rates in the primary data ingestion pipeline. Warnings about queue depths exceeding normal thresholds. Automated alerts firing to on-call engineers who'd only ever dealt with minor issues while I handled everything critical. At 3:15 p.m. my personal phone rang. The CFO, Warren Sutherland. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. I declined it. He left a message. "Sophia, there's an urgent situation. We need you to call back immediately." At 3:22 p.m. Levi called. I declined it. He texted, "Please call. Critical system issues. Can we talk?" At 3:31 p.m. Ahmed texted my personal number. Whatever you did, respect. They're losing their minds up here. Henry just asked me what a data pipeline is again. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I drove home, made myself tea, and opened my laptop to review the onboarding documents from my new employer. At 4 p.m., according to the information I learned later, 7 people were sitting in an emergency executive meeting. Wyatt Cooper, the CEO. Warren Sutherland, the CFO. Levi Coleman from HR. Henry Wallace, who'd supposedly been leading data strategy. The CTO, a recent hire named Helen Park who'd been with the company 4 months. The VP of Engineering, Luis Delgado. And someone from legal named Rachel Kim. The meeting notes, which eventually found their way to me through a colleague who remained sympathetic, read like a case study in organizational dysfunction. 4:03 p.m. Emergency executive session. Wyatt opened with the kind of forced calm that precedes panic. We have a critical situation with our data infrastructure. Multiple client-facing systems are experiencing failures. I need to understand what's happening and what our recovery timeline looks like. Helen pulled up a dashboard on the conference room monitor. We're seeing cascading failures in the primary data pipeline. Error rates are at 47% and climbing. The ingestion process is backing up, which means client data isn't being processed. If this continues, we'll breach our SLA commitments within the next 2 hours. What caused it? Warren asked. We're investigating, Helen said, which is what CTOs say when they don't know. Where's Sophia? Luis asked, though the question sounded rhetorical, like he already suspected the answer. The room went quiet. Levi cleared his throat. Sophia Hayes resigned this afternoon. Effective immediately. Resigned or was pushed out? Someone asked. She resigned, Levi said carefully. Following her compensation review meeting. Wyatt's expression shifted from concerned to dangerous. What compensation review? Levi pulled up a document on his tablet. Annual calibration process. She received a 2.3% adjustment, consistent with internal parity guidelines for technical positions. Who approved that? The compensation committee, Levi said. Based on benchmarking data for similar roles. Warren leaned forward. Define similar roles. Senior technical positions without strategic leadership responsibilities. Sophia built our entire data architecture, Luis said, his voice tight. She's prevented more outages than anyone else in the company combined. She's trained half our engineering team. What exactly isn't strategic about that? The guidelines focus on forward-looking transformation capabilities, Levi said, sounding like he was reading from a script. Sophia's expertise is valuable, but it's primarily maintenance-focused rather than innovation-driven. Maintenance-focused, Helen repeated slowly. The systems are failing right now because the person who maintained them left. Doesn't that suggest the maintenance was actually critical? Can we bring her back? Wyatt asked, looking at Levi. What would it take? I've tried calling. She's not responding. Try harder, Warren said. Offer whatever it takes. We're losing money by the minute here. Henry, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. I've been working closely with Sophia on data strategy initiatives. I should be able to guide the team through the immediate crisis. Everyone turned to look at him. Helen's expression was skeptical. You understand the pipeline architecture? I understand the strategic framework, Henry said. The technical team can handle the implementation details. The technical team is currently lost, Luis said bluntly. Because the one person who understands how everything connects just walked out. Can you restart the ingestion service? That's an execution-level detail. Can you restart the service? Luis repeated. Henry hesitated. I'd need to consult the documentation. There is no documentation for this, Ahmed said, speaking up from where he'd been invited to join remotely. At least nothing that covers the specific failure mode we're seeing. Sophia knew this system inside and out. She'd documented the normal operating procedures, but this is something else. This is the kind of thing she'd diagnose in 5 minutes because she understood the dependencies nobody else mapped. Why weren't those dependencies documented? Wyatt demanded. They were, Ahmed said carefully. In Sophia's personal notes. The ones she kept because official documentation has to go through review processes that take months, and these were edge cases she discovered through experience. Rachel, the legal counsel, spoke up. Do those notes belong to the company? Intellectual property created during employment. The systems belong to the company, Ahmed said. The knowledge of how they actually behave in production. That's expertise, not property. You can't compel someone to share expertise they learned through years of experience. Can we hire her as a consultant? Warren asked. Emergency rates, whatever it takes. Levi tried calling again. It went to voicemail. He left a message offering to discuss alternative arrangements and competitive compensation structures. At 4:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with another voicemail. Warren, this time his voice strained. Sophia, this is Warren Sutherland. I understand today's meeting didn't go the way you'd hoped. We'd like to discuss bringing you back in a consulting capacity. Name your rate. We need your expertise urgently. I didn't call back. At 5:15 p.m. the data pipeline failed completely. Not just degraded performance, total failure. Client data stopped flowing entirely. The backup systems, which I'd designed to handle temporary outages, were overwhelmed because nobody knew how to manually rebalance the load. At 5:33 p.m., the first client complaint came in. A healthcare system that depended on real-time data synchronization for patient records. Their clinical staff couldn't access updated information. They threatened to invoke the SLA penalty clause, which would cost Strive $50,000 for each hour of downtime. At 6 p.m., 3 more clients had filed formal complaints. A financial services firm couldn't process end-of-day reconciliations. A retail chain couldn't update their inventory systems. A logistics company couldn't track shipments. At 6:30 p.m., Wyatt authorized Warren to offer me $100,000 for a single day of emergency consulting. The offer came via email to my personal account. Professional, urgent, desperate. I replied at 6:45 p.m., thank you for reaching out. I'm unable to accept consulting work at this time as I've accepted a full-time position elsewhere. I'm confident your talented team will resolve the issues. Best wishes. At 7 p.m., according to Ahmed's later account, the emergency meeting had devolved into finger-pointing. Who'd approved the compensation structure? Why hadn't anyone identified Sophia as a single point of failure? Why were new hires making more than critical senior staff? Helen had managed to get the pipeline partially restored by 7:30 p.m., but it was unstable. The monitoring dashboards showed elevated error rates and warning signs that I would have recognized immediately as precursors to another failure. At 8:15 p.m. the system crashed again. This time it took down not just the primary pipeline but the backup processes as well. Data loss became a real possibility. Compliance violations were now certain. The legal team started calculating potential regulatory fines. At 9 p.m. Wyatt sent me a personal email. Subject line, please help us. The message was brief. Sophia, I made a mistake. The compensation decision was wrong. The way we handled today was wrong. We need your help, but more than that, I need you to know that I understand we failed you. If there's any way to make this right, please tell me. We're in serious trouble and you're the only person who can fix it. I read it twice. There was a part of me that felt satisfied seeing the admission. But satisfaction wasn't enough to bring me back. I replied, Wyatt, I appreciate the acknowledgement. However, I don't want to fix your emergency. I wanted to be valued for the work I was already doing. You had 13 years to get that right. You chose not to. What you're experiencing now is the cost of that choice. I hope it teaches you something valuable about how you treat the people who actually keep your company running. At 10:30 p.m. Strive managed another partial recovery. They'd brought in consultants from an emergency response firm that specialized in infrastructure crises. Those consultants charged $15,000 per hour, minimum 4-hour blocks, and still needed Ahmed and the remaining engineers to explain how Strive's specific systems were configured. By midnight, the estimated cost of the outage had reached $32 million in lost revenue, SLA penalties and emergency contractor fees. That number didn't include the longer-term damage, the clients considering alternative providers, or the reputational hit. The next morning I started at my new company, Genesis Solutions, a mid-sized firm that had built its reputation on actually valuing technical expertise. My new boss, Dr. Eleanor Vance, had founded the company after getting fed up with how traditional corporations treated engineers. She'd reached out to me months earlier after reading a technical blog post I'd written about data pipeline optimization. I saw the news about Strive, she said during our first coffee that morning. Your old company? Former company, I corrected. Want to talk about it? I gave her the condensed version. The compensation meeting, the resignation, the cascading failures. She nodded slowly. Good for you. Some organizations only learn through pain. Don't go back even for consulting money. They need to feel the full weight of their mistake. Over the next few days, the situation at Strive continued to deteriorate. They'd stabilized the core systems enough to prevent complete collapse, but performance was degraded. Error rates remained elevated. Clients were unhappy. The engineering team was working around the clock trying to understand systems I'd built over 13 years. Henry Wallace, the strategic director who made 42% more than me, quietly requested a transfer to a different part of the business. One where he wouldn't be expected to understand technical systems he'd spent a year pretending to lead. 2 weeks after I left, Strive's largest client, a national healthcare network, announced they were migrating to a competitor. Their official statement cited ongoing concerns about infrastructure reliability and risk management. The contract was worth $18 million annually. 3 more clients followed over the next month. Each one referenced service disruptions and instability. Each one represented millions in lost revenue. By the end of the quarter, Strive's stock had dropped 28%. Investor confidence was shaken. The board demanded answers and accountability. Wyatt Cooper resigned under pressure. In his departure announcement, he took responsibility for organizational decisions that failed to align with operational realities. Translation: we screwed up. Warren Sutherland, the CFO who'd offered me emergency consulting rates, stepped down to pursue other opportunities. Translation: he was forced out. Levi Coleman left the company 3 months later. He sent me a LinkedIn message. You were right about everything. I'm sorry we didn't listen. I'm moving to a company that actually values people over credentials. I should have fought harder for you. I appreciated the message but didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter. Henry Wallace lasted another 6 months before accepting a position at a marketing analytics firm. One where his MBA and slide deck skills were actually relevant. Where he wouldn't be exposed for not understanding the technical systems he was supposed to lead. 8 months after I left, I got a call from Eleanor Vance. She was grinning when I walked into her office. You're not going to believe this, she said. We just got a call from Strive Innovations. They want to hire Genesis to help them rebuild their data architecture properly. They asked specifically if you'd be willing to consult on the project. I laughed. What did you tell them? That I'd ask you, but that our rates are non-negotiable and you'd be leading the engagement on your terms or not at all. I thought about it for a few minutes. There was a certain poetry to the idea of being paid properly to fix what they'd broken by undervaluing me. But there was also something to be said for clean breaks and moving forward. Tell them I'll consult on one condition, I said finally. They implement a policy where technical expertise is compensated on par with strategic leadership positions. Where someone with 13 years of experience isn't making less than someone with 2 years and an MBA. Where they create transparent career ladders that don't require people to become managers to be paid fairly. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. That's a significant condition. It's non-negotiable. If they want my help, they need to prove they've learned the lesson. 2 weeks later, Strive agreed. They implemented what they called the Technical Excellence Track, a parallel career path to management where senior engineers could be promoted to positions like principal architect, distinguished engineer and technical fellow with compensation equal to director and VP level positions. They also conducted an audit of their entire compensation structure and made corrections for anyone who'd been systematically underpaid relative to their contribution. I consulted on their architecture rebuild for 6 months. My rate was 4 times what they'd been paying me as an employee. Every invoice I submitted felt like vindication. The project went well. We rebuilt their data infrastructure with proper redundancy, documentation and knowledge distribution. No more single points of failure. No more critical systems that only one person understood. During one of the working sessions I ran into Ahmed. He'd been promoted to senior principal engineer under the new technical track, with a compensation package that reflected his actual value. You know what's wild? He said over coffee. Half the leadership program people have left. Turns out when you actually have to deliver technical results instead of strategic frameworks, the credentials don't matter as much. Some people learn, I said. Usually the expensive way. Wyatt's replacement is different, Ahmed continued. She came from an engineering background. Actually understands what we do. First thing she did was audit all the compensation decisions from the past 3 years. She found a pattern of systematically undervaluing women and engineers from non-target schools. She's been making corrections. Better late than never. You could come back, full-time. They'd probably make you a VP if you asked. I shook my head. I'm happy where I am. Eleanor values what I bring without needing to learn it through crisis. That's worth more than a VP title. A year after my resignation, I got an email from someone I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Thank you." The sender was a woman named Julie Carmichael, a senior engineer at Strive I'd never met directly. She wrote, "I wanted you to know that the policy changes that came after you left changed my career. I was stuck at the same level for 8 years despite consistently delivering results. After the new technical excellence track was implemented, I was promoted to principal engineer with a 60% pay increase. I found out later that you'd made that a condition of your consulting work. You left, but you made it better for those of us who stayed. Thank you." I printed that email and kept it in my desk drawer. It mattered more than any of the apologetic messages from executives trying to salvage their reputations. 2 years later, I was speaking at a conference about data architecture and organizational design. During the Q&A, someone asked how to handle situations where companies undervalue technical expertise. "Document everything," I said. "Know your worth and be prepared to walk away when you're not valued appropriately. Some organizations only learn through consequences. Your job isn't to teach them. Your job is to protect your own value and find places that recognize it." After the session, a young engineer approached me. She couldn't have been more than 27. "I think I'm in the same situation you were in," she said. "I'm the only person who understands our core systems and I just found out I make less than new hires. I'm scared to leave because I don't want to let my team down." "Your team will survive," I told her. "If they can't, that's a management problem, not your problem. You don't owe loyalty to organizations that don't show loyalty to you. Know what you're worth, find someone who agrees, and don't apologize for choosing yourself." She thanked me and walked away. I hoped she'd find the courage to make the same choice I had. 3 years after leaving Strive, I was having lunch with Eleanor when she brought up an interesting opportunity. "Genesis is expanding," she said. "We need someone to lead our engineering organization. Someone who understands both the technical and human sides of building teams. Someone who won't make the mistakes other companies make." "Are you offering me the job?" "I'm saying it's yours if you want it. VP of Engineering. Full equity package. And a mandate to build something better." I took the position. Over the next year, I built an engineering organization based on everything I'd learned, both from what worked and what didn't. We implemented transparent compensation from day one. Every engineer knew the salary bands for their level and what it took to progress. We created technical career tracks that paid as well as management tracks. We valued experience and contribution over credentials and pedigree. We also implemented something I called knowledge distribution requirements. No critical system could depend on a single person. Every piece of infrastructure needed at least 3 people who understood it deeply. Documentation wasn't optional. Teaching wasn't optional. Making yourself replaceable wasn't a weakness. It was a requirement for promotion. The culture we built attracted talent that other companies overlooked. Experienced engineers who were tired of being undervalued. Self-taught developers who'd been passed over for candidates with better degrees. Women and minorities who'd been systematically underpaid despite delivering exceptional results. Within 2 years, Genesis had become known in the industry as a place where engineers actually wanted to work. Where technical expertise was valued properly. Where you didn't have to become a manager to be compensated well. Where the people who built the systems were treated as assets, not costs. 4 years after I left Strive, I ran into Wyatt Cooper at an industry event. He'd landed at a smaller company as an advisor, helping them avoid the mistakes he'd made. He saw me across the room and walked over. "Sophia," he said. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." "I don't hold grudges," I said. "What's past is past. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the corporate kind I sent in that email." "You already apologized." "I apologized for the crisis. I should apologize for the 13 years before the crisis. For every time we took you for granted. For every time we valued credentials over competence. For building systems that systematically undervalued people like you while overpaying people like Henry Wallace who couldn't actually do the work. I studied him for a moment. Did you learn anything? I learned that the people who keep things running are more important than the people who talk about strategy. I learned that loyalty is a two-way street and we expected yours without earning it. I learned that someday you have to pay the true cost whether you want to or not. We paid it all at once in the worst possible way. That's more honest than I expected. I consult now, he said. Helping companies build sustainable engineering cultures. I tell them about what happened with you. About how we lost $32 million and 3 major clients because we couldn't get compensation right. Some of them listen. Some don't. The ones who don't usually learn the same way we did. Some lessons are only taught through pain. The expensive kind, he agreed. For what it's worth, what you're building at Genesis, I've heard about it. You're doing it right. We talked for a few more minutes, then parted ways. I didn't feel angry or vindicated. I just felt glad that I'd made the choice I made. That I'd valued myself enough to walk away when they wouldn't. 5 years after my resignation, Strive had stabilized under new leadership. They'd rebuilt their technical organization properly. They'd corrected their compensation inequities. They'd created the kind of culture I'd hoped they'd build all along. But it had cost them $32 million in the initial crisis. Another $50 million in lost contracts. 18 months of degraded performance and client defections. An entire executive team replaced. Years of reputation damage. All of it could have been prevented with a fair compensation structure and basic respect for the people who actually did the work. I still have the notebook from my time there. The one with the incident logs and system documentation. On the last page, I'd written something the evening of my resignation. Organizations that don't value their people will eventually pay the full cost of their expertise. The only question is whether they learn before the crisis or after. They chose after. I chose to let them.